Hi, I'm Charles Galda, president of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action program, where we talk with New England leaders about making disciples who disadvantage themselves for unity and to do justice, which opens doors to sharing Jesus, and that transforms lives in our world. This week, I'm talking with Jonathan Reid. Jonathan is the executive director and founder of Fostering Hope, based in Providence, Rhode Island. Jonathan, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Charles. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
I shared and have been sharing with folks that we've done this project. I'm calling it the Post-Pandemic Church Project, for lack of a better term, but it started out with us asking over 100 leaders across New England, what has God been exposing in the church over the last 2 years, and what should we do about it? And one of the big themes we've talked about in prior episodes was making disciples. Another big theme we've talked about was healthcare, mental health. And another big bucket has been doing justice. Because when we make disciples who are willing to disadvantage themselves to do justice, people want to know about Jesus. And so we're going to have a whole series of episodes now on doing justice. And the way we're defining justice is, and I'm stealing this from Dr. Emmett Price, who was on prior episodes from Gordon Conwell at the time, is that it's anything that violates the pre-fall order God created. Tim Keller describes it as anything that prevents somebody from living the fullness of life Jesus intends for them in this life. So two different ways to come at the same thing. But we see over and over again, it opens doors to share Jesus. So let me start with the question of, is it unjust that a child grow up not in a loving two-parent family household? And if so, why?
Well, based on your first definition there's no question that part of God's original design is that a child would grow up in the context of a safe, loving family. So much important developmental things happen in those early years in that context. In our work at Fostering Hope, we're really even thinking about a more fundamental question of justice that's related. And that is the question of a child needing a family at all. We believe deeply that it's unjust that we as a society would remove a child from his or her home because we deem that that home is at least temporarily unable to provide safe and loving care for the child, but then not have a safe alternative for the child. So we take the child out of their home, and maybe that's the right decision, but then, sorry, we have no alternative prepared for you. And that's an issue of clear injustice that really drives much of what we do. In fact, our vision we call Project Zero. It's the dream of a day when 0 kids are waiting for a safe, supported family. We want to flip that script so that instead of kids waiting for a family to care for them, either temporarily or permanently, it's the families that are raised up willing and able to care for them.
So it may be a sad, tragic reality that children have to be removed from a home sometimes. And we're not saying that shouldn't be the case. But what I hear you saying is, but then there's a responsibility of believers who are told to do justice to ensure there's safe, adequate, caring housing and relationships for that child to go into. Did I catch you right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Scripture goes so far as to describe caring for kids in need of families as one of the authenticating marks that a Christian community has experienced genuine repentance, Isaiah 1, and is practicing genuine religion or worship, James 1:27. And so it is absolutely is a calling on us to be leading the way towards making sure that need is met.
Yeah, we've just been studying. It's funny you bring up that James verse because we've just been studying that in our team devotional with the whole point of, your religion is worthless, right? If you're not caring for widows and orphans, literally or figuratively, I guess, in this case. But we can do all the things we want, just like Israel was doing all the sacrificing and all those celebrations. And God saying matters not if you're not doing these other things.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the James passage, I think, is 2 things. One, that's obviously a descriptive example. It doesn't limit true worship to just those 2 categories, the widow and the fatherless there. But it's not a command to God's people. It's a description of
Mm.
what true worship looks like when it's practiced and when it's existed. So we believe deeply that as long as there are children in our communities as a Christian community who need temporary foster families, ideally until they are able to return to their biological families, which is the goal and should be the goal, or sometimes though permanent families, as long as that need exists, as a expression of our genuine worship, we can and must be part of the solution. Yeah.
Now, some people would say, well, I think about what a listener might be having go through their heads. Well, I didn't grow up in a two-family house, a two-parent household, and I did okay. Is that when you say, hey, there's real structural benefits to having that? Can you just touch on a couple of examples of what you mean?
Well, again, obviously, there's a lot of nuance to that question of a two-parent house, but quite honestly, when it comes to a child in foster care in need of a family, I mean, there are a lot of singles who are stepping into the story and providing foster or adoption, even as a single within the church community. And so, ideally, for a lot of good reasons that I think match God's design and also are been demonstrated through great research, it's great to have and ideal to have a two-parent family. But for a child in foster care who needs a loving, stable setting, having one safe, nurturing caregiver is better than being in a system where they're bouncing around from home to home because there's not enough homes, or they're in a group home, or worst case scenario, they age out of the system having never been returned to their biological families or been adopted. Much better to have a well-equipped, supported single or ideally two-parent family to care for them than to be left languishing.
And you just hit on an important point. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we work with a lot of human trafficking ministries, and a big target is kids who age out of the foster care system, and there's nothing for them in some states, and they then end up on the streets, and within 24 hours, 2/3 of them are approached by traffickers. That's a big deal issue for a different episode. But tell me, when we're talking about kids in foster care, are we talking about kids who are in a foster home with a foster parent or parents? Are we talking about group homes, both, or something different?
Yeah, so right now there's about 425,000 kids in our country living in the foster care system, which means they're either they've been removed from their primary biological caregiver and placed with a family outside of that original family unit. It could be an extended family member, which they call kinship foster care. It could be what you think of when you think of a foster family, a family receiving kids into their home, or yes, group homes where they're spending time in what's called congregate care. In New England, there's about 24,000 kids in the system. 25% of them will need to be adopted, and about 4 to 5% will end up aging out of the system without permanency, reunification, or adoption. Now, when you hear those numbers, it's easy to reduce the kids to a statistical category. It's a big number, and it can be very distant and abstract. But we have to remember that every one of those kids in New England foster care, all 24,000, is an individual an individual person uniquely created by God in his image, and therefore possesses a dignity and a value that we believe is not only worthy of our care, but really demands our care as people who value the sanctity of every life.
And so I'll just round it and say 25,000 kids in New England now you said a quarter of them, though, will need to be adopted. The others won't. Do you mean a quarter will get adopted and the others just won't get adopted? Or do you mean there's some reasons those kids would not be adopted?
So about 75% of kids who are in care now will reunify with their biological parents. And let me just say, as an organization, it's really important for us as we work with churches that we highlight and prioritize the desire to see as often as possible the family that this child ends up in to be their family of origin. either through family preservation on the front end or through safe, timely reunification. God's heart and design is for families to be able to be together, and that should be our heart as Christians. And it's a wonderful thing to see so many Christians getting into the foster care movement who have a heart to support reunification and even develop relationships with biological family as much as they can and become part of their life. That's a beautiful thing. The 25% are those situations where reunification doesn't end up possible. And so those kids will need to find an adoptable family. So right now, there's plenty of kids in the system whose parental rights have been terminated of their parents, and they're literally waiting for someone to open up their home and provide a forever family.
And if I'm doing my math right, that's 4,000 kids, right, who are adoptable. We'll call it that, for lack of a better term, maybe, unless you have a better term.
Yeah, they're on the adoption track. Either they're, as I just said, their rights have already been terminated, or they're on track for that, and that's the plan. And they're going to need a family.
And so why, given the Christian exhortation, not just in James, but in plenty of other places, why are there any kids waiting for adoption in the system?
That is a great question. And
can you tell I grew up Irish Catholic and I know about guilt?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because most states have what they call recruiters who are paid to as a full-time job to go find families. In the state of Massachusetts, where we do the most of our work currently, they've done an amazing job investing in recruiters. They went from basically zero. Now they have 29 recruiters, each representing one of the area offices, and that's their job. And we love them. They're one of our greatest partners in our work, is to work with them. But honestly, I don't believe that there should be a need for recruiters. As a society at large, and just from the Christian community, I feel like in light of what you just said, the many passages that call us to this, and the most compelling reason is our own experience of God's love personally. The logic behind the Christian call to engage in this kind of ministry is, since Jesus moved toward us in our place of need, entered into our affliction to meet us at our greatest point of need, we who've experienced that kind of love and grace, including being adopted into God's family as his children, and Jesus being our elder brother, we who've experienced that are compelled by it to be the kind of people who move toward others, who enter into affliction in order to engage in sacrificial love. And so, that being the case, in my opinion is, yes, as long as there's a need, as the Christian community discovers the need, we should be knocking on the door of the child welfare agencies saying, we heard there's kids who need families. What do we need to do to help meet that need? And that could happen. We could meet that need if we did it.
It's interesting, because I have observed that, and it was surprising to me just how many pastors in New England foster or adopt. And when they do, then it's clearly a bigger thing in their church, right? And you have lots of other families doing the same thing. But I think for most of us, we've never heard a sermon on our need to foster, to support those who do or adopt. Maybe it's too soft and I missed it, but it seems like we don't talk about it enough in the church. Is that fair, or is that really more of my background?
I think that's true, but I think it's changing. And one of our great joys is to see so many churches beginning to step into this story and to very intentionally begin to talk about it, and to do what really is the heart of our ministry, is to come alongside churches to help them make service to this community a more sustainable part of the DNA of their church. And I think a lot of churches are starting to recognize, okay, we want to make a difference in our community. We want to serve the vulnerable around us, but where do we start? And who's a population to begin with? And, when it comes to children who need families, we don't really have to think about that. I mean, that's a biblical category that we're called specifically to care for. And the beautiful thing about entering this space is kids in foster care, or the foster care system in general, is really at the crossroads of virtually every system issue that exists. So you're having this series on issues of justice, and I'm sure you're going to be talking about a lot of different issues. Virtually everyone you will cover at the crossroads are families impacted by those issues and children in those families who may have to be removed temporarily from those families because of some of the issues surrounding justice. And so it's really a beautiful centering issue as you begin to engage the foster care system and build bridges to all the people who are part of that. It opens up a lot of other opportunities to impact these other issues of justice as well. So it's a pretty wide-ranging issue.
It's interesting, and so help me a little bit. If how do I get involved in fostering? Is there a standard process? Does it vary significantly by state? Where do I go if I'm hearing this and thinking and want more information?
So you're talking about an individual person?
Yeah.
Says, okay.
Yeah.
So there's two things I'd say. First of all, and I'll plug this because I think this is the foundation. If you're part of a church community, aside from you personally being involved, we would really encourage you to begin to think about what would it look like for our church community to become more intentional about making this part of the DNA of who we are. We already have a culture. We already have things that are important to us. But if there really are kids in our community, right in our backyard, who need families, shouldn't we be doing something? And what can we do? And start that conversation. And of course, we would be happy to come alongside you and offer support. It's what we love to do. If you're an individual who's saying, my heart is for this. And by the way, George Barna did some really interesting research. It's a little bit dated now. It's maybe 8 years old. But nationally, he found that 31 to 38% of practicing Christians have seriously considered foster care or adoption. And about 2.5% to 3%, up to 5% have done it, which is really high in comparison to the general population. So Christians are more engaged and more interested and more thinking about this than the general population. But that's still a big gap between the 31 to 38% who thought about it and the 3 to 5 who've done it. So we know that there's a lot of Christians out there who are doing just what you said. They're thinking about it, and for many different reasons. We find a lot of times they're waiting for the right time. And there's always a reason why it's not the right time. It's never a perfect time. But in the meantime, while we wait for the right time, there's kids in the system waiting for a family. And so there comes a point where we just have to take that step. So that was a long way to get to your question, which is what do you do? Well, depends where you are in the process. If you're still exploring and need more information, it's a couple things you can do. Number one, if you know a foster family within your church community or the extended Christian community around you, ask them if you could have a call or sit down over coffee and just ask them about their experience and get more information from someone who's involved in it. There's certainly a lot of resources online that you can research as well. We would be happy to sit down and talk with you and answer any questions you have about the process, and maybe those questions that are, you're afraid to ask, but they're important to you. We would be happy. So you can go to our website, fosteringhope.org, and there's a contact form, and reach out, and someone will reach out to you. Beyond that, if I'm ready for the next step, yes, your child welfare agency in your community will have a very clear process. They often have information sessions that they advertise where they open up to the community, and they'll kind of get the ball rolling by attending one of those info sessions, and tell you all about the process and give you an opportunity to actually apply. If you know you're ready to apply, you can just kind of skip the info session process and go right to the application, and a social worker will reach out to you and get the ball rolling.
I remember even Connecticut did a session. I don't know how often they do it, but they did a session for church people who are thinking about fostering, right? So they'll tailor it.
Yeah,
we have the audience in some cases.
Absolutely. And we often do info sessions with churches as part of a step. And sometimes in collaboration with multiple churches in a region. In fact, we have a foster care and adoption seminar, a little plug, coming up on April 30th being hosted at one of our partner churches in Haverhill, Mass, West Church, on that Saturday, which will explore the different ways to engage. And we've invited folks from child welfare in to explain the process on both adoption and foster care. So there's a lot of ways to find information out. Absolutely.
And if you can't find that event, let us know. Just reach out to Vision New England. You can find emails on our site. We'll get you connected to it too. And so so I'm thinking about it. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit called, a little bit convicted. What support infrastructure is there out there for me? And what are some of the challenges I just need to understand before I go get too deep?
Yeah, it is important to go in with your eyes wide open. And a lot of people have a fairy tale kind of view of what it'll be like to, have a child come into their home who needs a temporary family. And it's important to know that you're entering into a very complex system. A child welfare system that's does a lot of great things every day to care for vulnerable families, but have way more caseloads on their plate than they can than is healthy for them to have. You've got family courts, you've got therapeutic and medical systems, and then you've got children in your home who've experienced some type of trauma in their past that is having an effect on their development and oftentimes presents itself in some behaviors and emotions that can be challenging. So all that leads to a lot of unique stressors that can be hard for foster families. So it's important to know that. And that's why talking to people who are involved and preparing well will help you enter into the space with success. DCF will provide you obviously with a social worker. They'll provide you with training on the front end as part of the licensing process. You will get a stipend from DCF to help pay for the costs of having a child in your care. You will have access to state health care for the child you're caring for, support groups, those kinds of things. So there are resources available to support you through child welfare agencies. But it's important to think well about it on the front end.
And it sounded like I can't remember which state I was looking at, but after we talked the first time, I just started doing a little exploring, and you could see that they give you the stipend is intended to cover education. So there's an education one, there's food, there's clothing, there's medical care. So they're trying to do it. I don't know how generous that stuff is across states, but they're trying to do it so it's not a financial drain for you, because there's obviously other commitment you have to make. Did I kind of read that stuff right?
Yeah, that's fair. And I would say the monthly stipend doesn't necessarily cover the full total of, the cost that you would maybe invest, but it does. It definitely is a huge help and is meant to do that.
Now, what are some of the things I should be prepared for that I might not be thinking about if I'm not too deep into the space?
Yeah. I think the two biggest things, so there is a high turnover rate nationally among foster families. Some studies show up to 50% don't continue into their second year, not because they don't want to do foster care, because they just spend a lot of time preparing to be a foster parent, but because of three things. One, frustration with the very complex system. Number two, lack of personal relational support in their life, a sense that I'm in this alone and I need help. And then number three, a lack of training specific to the trauma related needs that kids often have. And so as an organization, we have some programming that really focuses on those second two. Now we're trying to build bridges and support the foster care system in tangible ways. And our churches are doing an amazing job supporting their local child welfare agencies and social workers. But we have one program that we help churches establish wraparound support teams that provide relational support for fostering and adoptive families in an accountable way. And some research has shown that when families have that kind of wraparound support, the number that continues into year two goes from about 50% to upper 80s, low 90s, because they're not doing it alone. And that's something the church is so good at. That should be our bread and butter. One another ministry.
What are a couple of examples of wraparound services then that churches are providing?
So we have a formal program called Support One that identifies particular roles that people on a team would have. And so one would be an encourager who taps into their spiritual gift of encouragement to just speak life and encouragement into the family in real, tangible, practical ways. Another one is the helper, finding practical ways to just tangibly help the family and lighten their load. So, for example, hey, what's a couple nights of the month that are really hard for you? Extra appointments, people in your home. Would a meal help on that night? We'll make sure that every month you can count on a meal that night, or other types of tangible helps. Then the number one thing that families need is childcare support, so that we want our families to have at least 2 nights or timeframes a month where they can count on having coverage, so that they can, if they're married, have date nights to kind of prioritize their marriage, or maybe be part of a community group, or just run errands or go to the beach and meditate, whatever you want to do. And those things in sum total, while each one might be small, they're really powerful ways of supporting a family. And here's the really cool thing. It provides a real on-ramp for other people in the church who say, I have a heart for kids in foster care, but I just can't foster right now. Is there anything I can do? Oh, I could support a foster family in an organized way. I'd love to do that. And it empowers people in the church who sees that to say, oh, if I'm going to be supported like that, maybe I can take the courageous step of being a foster family. And one last little detail, about 35% of people who serve on a wraparound team end up becoming a foster or adoptive family because they become so close to the kids and they see this in action that they say, why am I not doing this? And so they take that next step, which is a real powerful thing.
Well, it's the same old story. We've seen it over and over again, and it's in the Bible, right? Is when we disadvantage ourselves to serve and love others, we're blessed too.
Yes.
Right. And that's going to make me want to step in more. And so I heard three spaces. I heard adoptive care we need to be thinking about. I've heard fostering is something we need to be thinking about. And I've heard wraparound services are things we need to be thinking about and questioning whether God is calling and convicting me to do something personally in this space. Did I capture it?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big part of it. So when we work with churches, we're about culture, right? We have the motto, not everyone can do everything or the same thing, but everyone can do something meaningful. So a big part of our work for churches who really want to make this part of the culture is help them establish multiple entry points for people to be able to step into the story at a place that aligns with their current gifting and capacity. So there's service-based opportunities that meet tangible needs of professionals and families in the foster care community, but that are real low commitment, right? Donating to a drive for clothing, participating in a service event one weekend that blesses the community. That's easy entry point. Prayer, being part of a prayer team. Then there's wraparound support or other types of engagement that's a little bit higher level of commitment. And then there's the highest level, which is inviting kids into your home. So we invite individuals to think about what's your fit in foster care. And then we invite churches to say, hey, every church can do something. So what can we as a church do based on our size, our location, our resources, our vision and mission? And that's a big part of it.
And I heard you say one thing Fostering Hope wants to do, because I want to make sure we get in there all the things you do. One thing Fostering Hope does is if you're interested in pursuing this, you can contact us and you're going to help me through that process. You're caring for, supporting, and loving the DCF workers around New England. And what else do you do?
So, and we do, one of our big programs now is also providing evidence-based trauma-informed caregiver training for caregivers and professionals. We've introduced about 1,000 caregivers and professionals over the last few years to practical knowledge and tools about how to provide healing care for kids who've experienced trauma. So that's become a big part of it. And we also do that with churches, helping lead churches to become what we call trauma wise, so that as they invite their families to step into foster care, their children's and youth ministry really is a safe place for them. And so that's a big part of it. But let me just say, our operational vision is that every child welfare office in New England would have a network of churches around them committed to serving the need in their own community, taking ownership of who are the kids in our community who need families, who are the social work professionals who need support and encouragement, and how can we do that as individual churches, doing our own kind of finding our own place, but then as a network of churches together, collaborating for greater impact. And it's been really powerful to see what the churches have been doing and how receptive child welfare has been to their engagement.
I was going to say exactly that. Just as we wrap up, what we have this vision sometimes or perception sometimes when we're Christians that government doesn't like us, and there's some reasons why people have that, and it's not entirely unfounded. But when we collaborate with government to help them do the things they're doing, that they're just not resourced and capable of doing all, suddenly they love us and they welcome us in, even though they disagree with us on so many things. And it sounds like that's your experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. On both sides, there can be skepticism. And as we get to know each other and see each other as real people, and as the church has come with a real humble posture with no agenda other than we're here to love, serve, and support you, how can we do that best? And it's been remarkable.
that how can we serve you best? That sounds like a Christian principle.
Say so. I'd say so.
Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us and sharing this, but thank you for the ministry too. And I'd like to thank our producer, Jessica Mangano. I'd like to thank our listeners. If you feel called and convicted or just questioning, it's Fostering Hope. And what's the URL? Where's the website, Jonathan?
Fosteringhope.org.
There you go, fosteringhope.org. If you have any trouble finding it, let us know and we'll get you connected. When we are the people of God doing the work of God in our communities, it transforms lives and the world. And you can visit us at visionnewengland.org for past episodes, other resources, and to click donate to partner with us to accelerate evangelism in New England. Our program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.